Everybody knows the story about Jesus' crucifixion. Even if you're an atheist, you hear the story once or twice around Easter time. But in this video, you are going to learn 11 facts about Jesus' crucifixion that you have never heard before. Seriously, even if you've been a Christian your entire life, these will be brand new to you. For example, fact number 10. Did you know that Jesus didn't even die from his wounds? He died from, well, you're going to have to wait and find out for yourself. Just a quick reminder before we jump into this video, make sure you like and subscribe. This is totally free for you to do, but it helps out the channel a lot, and I appreciate it. Jesus' trials and crucifixion is outlined in Luke chapter 23, so we're going to read through the chapter and stop when I got a fact for you. Then the whole assembly rose and led him off to Pilate, and they began to accuse him, saying, "We have found this man subverting our nation. He opposes payments of taxes to Caesar and claims to be the Messiah king." So Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "You have said so," Jesus replied. Then Pilate announced to the chief priests and the crowd, "I find no bias for a charge against this man." But they insisted, "He stirs up the people all over Judea by his teaching. He started in Galilee and has come all the way here." On hearing this, Pilate asked if the man was a Galilean. When he learned that Jesus was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased, because for a long time he had been wanting to see him. From what he had heard about him, he hoped to see him perform a sign of some sort. He plied him with many questions, but Jesus gave him no answer. The chief priests and the teachers of the law were standing there, vehemently accusing him. Then Herod and his soldiers ridiculed and mocked him, dressed him in an elegant robe, and they sent him back to Pilate. That day, Herod and Pilate became friends. Before, they had been enemies. All right, this brings up fact number 1. Herod and Pilate disliked each other. Well, first of all, for those of you less familiar, who are these people? Pilate was a Roman governor who oversaw the entire region, and Herod was a tetrarch who was kind of like a king, but he oversaw Galilee. And these two characters, up until now, hated each other. Now, the fact that they hated each other is not the hidden fact. It's why they hated each other. That's what the hidden fact is. The first reason is because of a massacre of Galileans that Pilate ordered in Jerusalem. The Bible refers to this in Luke 13:1. By Pilate ordering this massacre, it was seen by Herod as an overstep of his jurisdiction. Herod says, if there's anybody that's going to massacre the Galileans, it's going to be me. Another reason why these two characters hated each other was the issue of the golden shields. There was an instance when Pilate hung golden shields in Herod's palace. Now, these shields were a symbolic gesture of Rome's authority over Galilee. So basically, these golden shields were like a big middle finger from Pilate to Herod. Pilate's trying to say, I'm the boss and you ain't. Eventually, the people complained to Emperor Tiberius about these shields, and Tiberius had Pilate move these shields to another pagan temple. But either way, this showcase would have left a bad taste in Herod's mouth. And the third reason why Pilate and Herod hated each other was over the building of an aqueduct in Jerusalem. Jerusalem needed an aqueduct, and Pilate famously used Jewish treasury money to build that aqueduct. And this act sparked a rebellion where the Jewish people did not like how the Romans were building the aqueduct with their money. So Pilate sent assassins to go and kill the people who were leading this rebellion. And it's reported that some of the leaders of this rebellion were Galileans. Once again, Herod is upset because if there's anyone that's going to kill my own people, it should be me. So the root of this feud had to do with jurisdiction. Who actually had the right to rule over Galilee? Was it Herod, who was named the tetrarch of that region, or was it the governor who oversaw that region as well as other regions? If you live in the United States, you can kind of think of this in the same way that state governments and the federal governments tend to feud with each other. So the reason why Herod and Pilate became friends after this exchange is because Pilate sent Jesus to Herod. This was a gesture of good faith to Herod, saying that you have jurisdiction. And then Herod gave Jesus back to Pilate with the same type of token of good faith. So these two gestures put to rest the past, and Herod and Pilate became buddies. They're both scumbags, but at least they're buddies now. All right, let's continue reading until we get to the next fact. Pilate called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people, and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who was inciting the people to a rebellion. I have examined him in your presence and have found no basis for your charge against him. Neither has Herod, for he sent him back to us. As you can see, he has done nothing to deserve death. Therefore, I will punish him and then release him." But the whole crowd shouted, "Away with this man! Release Barabbas to us." Barabbas had been thrown into prison for an insurrection in the city and for murder. Wanting to release Jesus, Pilate appealed to them again, but they kept shouting, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" For the third time he spoke to them. "Why? What crime has this man committed? I have found in him no grounds for the death penalty. Therefore I will have him punished and then release him." But the loud shouts, they insistently demanded that he be crucified, and their shouts prevailed. So Pilate decided to grant their demand. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, the one they had asked for, and surrendered Jesus to their will. All right, hidden fact number 2. Jesus was in fact put on trial 3 separate times. Yes, indeed, he was put on trial 3 separate times. Did you know that? If you knew that Jesus was put on trial 3 times, you should pat yourself on the back. Oops! I tricked you. He was actually put on trial 4 separate times. He was put on trial with the religious leaders and found guilty of blasphemy. And then he was put on trial with Pilate, and there was no guilt found into him. And then he was put on trial with Herod, no guilt there. And then he was put on trial for the 4th time with Pilate. And of course, legally speaking, Jesus was not considered guilty at all, but the crowd pleaded with Pilate to send him to be crucified and to release Barabbas instead. And that brings us to fact number 3, the details around the release of Barabbas. What you were taught about the crowds wanting to release Barabbas instead of Jesus probably sounded something like this. The crowds hated Jesus so much that they were willing to release a dangerous murderer into their midst. They were willing to put themselves into danger in order to put Jesus to the cross. That's how much they hated Jesus. But that perspective isn't exactly correct. Pilate described Barabbas as being an insurrectionist and a murderer. But we need to understand that this is being held in a Roman court. Barabbas was guilty under Roman standards. So when Barabbas was caught as an insurrectionist, he wasn't an insurrectionist against Israel, he was insurrecting against Rome. And the murder that he committed was certainly against a Roman, not against an Israelite. So certainly this character Barabbas would have been seen more like a local hero than somebody who's threatening to the locals. And that would have been why the religious leaders would have pushed for the crowds to release Barabbas instead of Jesus, because it would have been easy to convince the crowd to want to release Barabbas because he was a local hero. And that makes a lot more sense on why the crowd was able to rally around a murderer instead of Jesus. All right, we got to read one more verse before our next 2 facts. As the soldiers led him away, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who was on his way in from the country, and put the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. So this is a very famous scene when a guy called Simon comes and carries Jesus' cross for him. Now, the Hollywood version of this scene is that Jesus is carrying his cross and he can't carry it anymore. And then this Good Samaritan fella, Simon of Cyrene, decides to carry it the rest of the way for Jesus. But that's not what happened at all. It wouldn't have been Simon's choice. Under Roman authority, there was a rule called requisitioning. And if a Roman soldier was to requisition a civilian, by law, that civilian had to carry the paraphernalia of the soldiers 1 Roman mile, which is equivalent to about 1,600 yards. So this Simon of Cyrene character was not necessarily being a good Samaritan. He was forced to. But like many things we're forced to do, God has a special plan. And that brings us to fact number 5, Simon of Cyrene's son. As we just discussed, Simon was an innocent bystander who was forced to carry Jesus' cross. But in other gospel accounts, Simon is identified as Simon of Cyrene, father of Rufus. Now, in ancient historical texts like this, you would not identify somebody simply as their first name unless that person was very well known. So when Simon was identified as Simon of Cyrene, father of Rufus, we know that this Rufus character would have been a prominent person. person. And that certainly was the case here. Rufus became one of the earliest and most influential church leaders. So certainly this experience that Simon of Cyrene had, he passed on to his own son, and his son became an influential church leader. And that is the way that God works sometimes. It's pretty incredible. Now we've got 6 more really interesting facts coming up, but before we continue reading, just a quick reminder that we are launching a new segment on this channel called Learn the Bible in a Year. The goal of this new segment is to read and understand the entire Bible in 1 year. This new segment will include daily episodes that I will upload giving you an overview of the text that you read for that day, as well as giving you insightful questions about said text. There is also a Learn the Bible in a Year workbook. The digital version of this book is totally free. The link to that is in the description. You can also get the printed version. The link to that is in the description of this video as well. Now, let's continue reading so we can uncover the next facts. A large number of people followed him, including women who mourned and wailed for him. Jesus turned and said to them, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children. For the time will come when you will say, 'Blessed are the childless women, the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed.' Then they will say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if people do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry?" 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, they crucified him there along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, "He saved others, let him save himself if he is God's Messiah, the chosen one." The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was written a notice above him which read, "This is the King of the Jews." All right, this brings us to fact number 6, what was written above Jesus' head. As we just read there, the inscription said, "This is the King of the Jews." Now, if you read this from a cursory view, you might come to the conclusion that this written over his head was simply like a title of Jesus, similar to what might be written on his tombstone or something like that. But that's actually not the case. This inscription above Jesus' head was a political move. This was another gesture by the governor Pilate, giving the middle finger to the religious leaders and then again giving the middle finger to all of the Jews. First things first, typically the inscription that goes above the head of somebody being crucified is a list of what they had done wrong, what they were accused of. So by Pilate instructing, "This is the King of the Jews," signifies that this man is not guilty, that he's being put to death wrongly. This, once again, is a big middle finger to the religious leaders who insisted that he needed to be put to death. This gesture for sure would have made the religious leaders look very bad. And religious leaders hate looking very bad, in case you didn't know. Further evidence of this is in the Gospel of John, where the religious leaders go to Pilate and they ask him to change the inscription above Jesus' head. They want it changed to, "This man claims to be the King of the Jews," but Pilate refuses, because he wants the religious leaders to look bad. But this inscription holds a dual purpose. By having the inscription above Jesus' head saying that he is the King of the Jews while he is being crucified on a Roman cross is a message from Rome, meaning Pilate, to the Jewish people. He's sending the message that Rome just killed your king. So don't try anything foolish, because Rome is here and here to stay. All right, let's read a couple more scriptures to get the next fact. One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other criminal rebuked him. "Don't you fear God," he said, "since you are under the same sentence? We are being punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve, but this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus answered him, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." And this brings up fact number 7. We have been taught incorrectly about what happened after Jesus was crucified. In the Hollywood version of this story, Jesus dies and then goes to hell and fights against Satan and his demons for 3 days. And then after 3 days, he is victorious. And then that's when he raises from the dead. But there is literally absolutely no evidence for this found anywhere in the Bible. Quite the contrary. In the Gospel of John, for example, it's recorded that one of Jesus' last words is, "It is finished." Well, wouldn't that be kind of awkward if Jesus says, "It is finished," but then he has to go somewhere else to actually finish it? Or was it truly actually finished? And even here in the Gospel of Luke, a couple of verses from now, Jesus says, "Father, to your hands I commit my spirit." Well, that doesn't seem to line up with the Hollywood narrative either. It'd be kind of awkward if Jesus said, "Father, I'm coming to you. Just kidding, I'm going to go down to hell for 3 days, then I'm going to come back to earth, and in 40 days, then I'm going to come to you." That doesn't seem to quite line up. That's because Jesus did not die and go to hell to fight Satan. He died, and when he died, he was the perfect sacrifice, and then and there it was finished. When he died, he went up to sit on the right hand of God the Father. So the big theological debate, which is how could Jesus be in paradise that day with this sinner when he has to go down to hell and fight Satan for 3 days? Well, the answer to that is pretty easy. He didn't go down to hell to fight Satan. He was victorious when it was finished. He went up to the Father in heaven, and that man was with him. Simple as that. This next fact is one of my favorites, so let's keep reading for a bit. "It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon, for the sun had stopped shining." Okay, this is a huge claim here. It's easy to read over this and just kind of continue on until Jesus dies, but the claim here is that while Jesus was dying for 3 hours, the entire world went black. Well, if that actually happened, wouldn't there be some sort of historical evidence around this event? And in fact, there is. There's obviously the accounts in the Bible, but there are some non-biblical accounts as well. Historians Thallus and Phlegon of Tralles indicate that the entire world did in fact go black, and there's no explanation for it. They both say that there was no possibility of an eclipse because that was during the Passover. There wouldn't have been an eclipse during the Passover, and the whole world went black. There was no scientific explanation for why this happened. Another historian, Tertullian, I find his account even more fascinating. His account was similar to the other historians. The entire world went black, no chance for a solar eclipse. We don't know why. The whole world went black for 3 hours. But this man was a Roman. Now, Rome just crucified Jesus, who claimed to be God, and Romans worship false gods, pagan gods. And the entire world going black during Jesus' death would have certainly given evidence to Jesus actually being God. So this Tertullian guy would have had all the reasons in the world to not record the fact that the world went black for 3 hours, but yet he records it because it actually happened. And the rest of verse 45 says, "And the curtain of the temple was torn in two." Now, this was a big deal spiritually. The curtain in the temple was this barrier that we had between us and God. And when Jesus dies, the curtain tears in two, signifying that we no longer have to have a barrier between us and God. But here is fact number 9. The act of the veil in the temple being torn had to have been from God. Human origins would have been totally impossible. And here's why. Atheists, as well as the religious leaders, suggest that the temple curtain was torn by Jesus' disciples. Now, as we read in the last chapter, we know that all of his disciples fled in fear. Peter denies him 3 times, and so he's weeping, and Judas betrayed him, so he's not in the club anymore. But the theory is that the remaining 10 somehow stopped being afraid, and as a way to protest against Jesus' death, they sneak into a guarded temple and tear this veil in two from top to bottom. Now, I have an engineering background, so immediately I want to put some numbers to this act. First of all, this veil was 60 feet tall and 30 feet wide. So to tear this thing from top to bottom, you would have needed a 60-foot ladder at least. And there wouldn't have been a lot of 60-foot ladders laying around Jerusalem. But even so, let's say they did get a 60-foot ladder and they snuck into the temple that is guarded, and they were able to actually get to the top of this veil where they could tear it in half. This curtain was 4 inches thick. That is about this thick. Think about that. Think about what it would take to tear a braided curtain that's as thick as your hands. The amount of force it would have required to tear this curtain is 5,000 newtons of force. This is roughly the same amount of force that would be required to blow up a nuclear power plant. So no, a human could not have torn this veil. There is no earthly explanation on how this could have possibly been done, except God did it. which is what happened. All right, now I'm going to read the rest of the chapter, and then I'm going to hit you with the last 2 facts. Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." When he had said this, he breathed his last. The centurion, seeing what had happened, praised God and said, "Surely this was a righteous man." When all the people who had gathered to witness this sight saw what had taken place, they beat their breasts and went away. But all those who knew him, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance watching these things. Now there was a man named Joseph, a member of the council, a good and upright man, who had not consented to their decision and action. He came from the Judean town of Arimathea, and he himself was waiting for the kingdom of God. Going to Pilate, he asked for Jesus' body. Then he took it down, wrapped it in linen cloth, and placed it in a tomb cut in the rock, one in which no one had yet been laid. It was preparation day, and the Sabbath was about to begin. The women who had come with Jesus from Galilee followed Joseph and saw the tomb and how his body had been laid in it. Then they went home and prepared spices and perfumes, but they rested on the Sabbath in obedience to the commandment. All right, this brings us to fact number 10. I alluded to this fact at the beginning of the video, and that is how Jesus actually died. Now, it would be very easy for us to make the assumption that Jesus died from his many wounds. I mean, he had been literally tortured. He had been beaten up by the religious leaders and the mob that brought him before Pilate. He was given 39 lashes by a whip called the Cat of Nine Tails. 40 lashes is considered a death sentence, but he was given 39. A crown of thorns was wedged onto his head. He was totally brutalized, and then finally, his hands and his feet were nailed to the cross. So yeah, I would reasonably think that he would die from all of these wounds, from blood loss or something like that. But that's not the way that he died. He actually died because of asphyxiation. And this is the reason why crucifixion is so incredibly terrible. When you are hanging on a cross and your hands are up on the cross beams, your body slumps down, making it very difficult to breathe. And as your body continues to stretch out, eventually you will not be able to breathe at all. The only way you would be able to breathe is if you pushed up with your feet, which is currently nailed to a cross. So what happens during crucifixion is that you have to push against the nails in your feet to keep yourself from asphyxiating, and then eventually you get so exhausted that you asphyxiate. And that is exactly what happened to Jesus. It's terrible and sad, but that's what happened. And the final 11th fact that you didn't know about Jesus' crucifixion is his last words. Here recorded in Luke, it said that his last words were, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." But other gospel accounts say that his last words were, my God, why have you forsaken me?" So what's the deal? What were his actual last words? And here's where the interesting fact comes in, or maybe it's something you never thought about before. None of the writers of the gospel books actually saw Jesus die. Think about it. 2 of the gospel books were written by people who were not Jesus' apostles. They were written by John, Mark, and Luke, who gathered evidence through interviewing people about the entire life of Jesus, including his death. So they wouldn't have been there when Jesus spoke his last words. And the other 2 gospel books were written by Jesus' apostles, Matthew and John. And they weren't there when Jesus died. They would have been busy trying to tear the veil in the temple. I'm joking. They weren't in the temple. But that was pretty funny. You have to admit that. As we said earlier, his apostles ran away with fear. So none of these writers would have actually been there to hear his last words. Most likely they would have gathered this information by interviewing people who were actually there. The most likely scenario here is that prior to Jesus dying, he simply prayed. He prayed to God the Father. And this is in alignment with what he did through his entire life, praying to God the Father. So certainly the gospel writers like Matthew or John or Luke would have interviewed people who were actually there. They would have heard this entire prayer. And they wrote down what the witness remembered. Either way, the gist of what Jesus' last words are essentially the same. He's saying, I've come here and I've accomplished what I've come to accomplish. Now I'm going home to you, God the Father. Pretty epic. And that is the 11 facts that you did not know about Jesus' crucifixion. Let me know in the comment section which facts you already knew. That way I can give you brownie points. We all love brownie points. And a reminder about the Bible in a Year series that we're launching. Make sure at the very least you pick up your free digital copy of the workbook, and make sure you subscribe to this channel so that you see when the daily episodes come out to help you understand what you're reading when you read through the Bible in a year. It's going to be awesome. In the next episode, we're going to be going over Luke chapter 24. You can see that episode right around here. We are almost done with the Gospel of Luke. It's super exciting. And I'll see you in the next episode. But until then, Jesus loves you, and shalom, shalom.